Welcome to this week's edition of Outdoors Online, a weekly webcast produced by the North Dakota Game and Fish Department. I'm your host, Tom Jensen. My guest this week is Aaron Robinson. Aaron is the Game and Fish Department's upland bird supervisor. We're going to talk about the overall outlook for upland birds this fall. Aaron, we're going to take the species one by one. Let's start with sage grouse. You did your actual counts a while back. How did those look?
Yeah, we typically do our sage grouse counts the third week of April. This year we had a drastic decline. We went from, well, we never did have a very strong population, but we went from 31 males to 17 males, which is almost a 50% decrease in our population. We're attributing that to our population has become so small and so sparse that we're not getting any reproduction with our females. There's not very many leks, not very many males to breed those females, and so we're not getting any reproduction. That's just a function of population being at a level that cannot offset the natural mortality that's occurring every year. So we're struggling, there's no doubt about it.
Obviously those numbers would not support a hunting season here in North Dakota. Right.
I mean, we're at a point where a hunting season on sage grouse may be a thing of the past. We likely will never open it again. I can't say that for sure, but it would take a very strong miracle to make that happen anytime soon.
We haven't had one now for 6-7 years maybe?
Yep, the last season we had was in 2007, and we closed it in 2008 because we had an outbreak of West Nile virus that year, and so it dropped our population below 100 males, which is a threshold where we determined to close the season.
Well, let's switch gears and move on to something that might be a little bit rosier, and that's sharp-tailed grouse.
Yeah, I mean, our sharp-tailed population essentially covers the entire state. I mean, the western 2/3 of the state is the main primary range. We do have populations in the eastern part of the state. But essentially we have grouse, sharptails in almost every county, well, every county in North Dakota. We do get some harvest pretty much everywhere. Our spring counts, we just finished analyzing that, are about 6% down statewide from last year. And that is basically an indication of the population trend or index that we monitor from year to year. We were kind of expecting that. We had some dry weather last year. Production wasn't as good, and so I was expecting a little bit of a decline, and it's relatively similar to last year's breeding population.
You have ways that, of course, sage grouse, you said you can count those by hand and almost on one hand.
Right.
Pheasants, you have a different way of counting. How do you estimate your sharp-tail
Right.
population?
So what we do is we have these what we call our sharp-tail census blocks, and they're roughly a 36 square mile or a township block that's spread across the state, and we have, roughly 25 of these that we count across the state. And our biologists go out in the spring and they do listening runs to try to identify every single dancing ground in that block. And once we find out all the dancing grounds, then we get a count on it 3 times over the course of April. And so we get a replicate count to figure out the high count of males attending, and we use that protocol every year to be able to compare from year to year.
You do have a species of grouse that is pretty unique to the state, and some people probably don't even know that we have them here, and that's ruffed grouse.
Yeah, we do have 2 small populations of ruffed grouse up in the Pembina Gorge and the Turtle Mountains. And again, this is a very small population. If any of our sportsmen who have hunted those in the fall, it's a unique opportunity. You get out in the aspen groves and some of that beautiful country up there, and so we do have a population. Our numbers have struggled in the past years. I mean, those populations are based on different life stages of the aspen groves, and when you get an older stand of aspen groves, those populations decline, so you have to continually do management to keep those young stands growing, and that's what really produces ruffed grouse. They are on a cyclic trend. Typically they have a 10-year cyclic trend, and we are on the upper end of the lower trough, so we're just starting to head up from the last couple of years, and I'm hoping that we're going to see another increase this year, but we're still looking at those numbers.
How about Hungarian partridge?
You know, our Hun partridge is one of the bright spots, I think, in the state. Back in the early 90s and the 80s, we had a tremendous population. I mean, we harvested more Huns than any state in the country. And then our population kind of crashed coming into those wet years that we had. And now it's starting to rebound a little bit. I think we haven't looked at the harvest yet because we're waiting on some license numbers, but I'm anticipating and guessing we're going to have quite a bit of an increase of harvest from last year. So I'm seeing a lot more partridge. The biologists that I talk to are seeing a lot more, and they're kind of, it's still spotty, it's still hit and miss. It's not something where a sportsman can call me and say, well, where should I go for Huns? I can't even point you to the exact point to go for Huns. It's an opportunistic birds that, you know, if you can find some areas that are associated with ag that hold sharp tails, you're likely going to find some Huns.
Well, let's talk about the species that everybody's been waiting to hear about. That's pheasants.
Our pheasant population obviously is kind of the backbone of our upland game program. We have more hunters pursue them. And our population, or our spring population from our crowing counts, is relatively the same as last year. There was about almost a 2% increase this year. And that has kind of varied across the state. The southeast part of the state had quite a bit of a decline, but the other regions from west to central were slightly up, but not enough to say there's a big increase from last year.
I know a lot of pheasant hunters out there that are going, hey, you know, we had another mild winter and this is going to be just gangbusters this year. But
yeah, there's a lot of variables that are going to go into our population and the hunting season this year. A mild winter is a good start, but the problem is you have to have the right conditions to produce a good hatch. And you don't want really wet, cold years, and you don't want dry years, because dry years don't produce the insects that the chicks need to survive those first 10 days. And so this year, at least in the west and even some parts of the central, we've been in a pretty dry cycle, and that's going to impact the survivability of these chicks. I think we'll have good nest success, good nest initiation, and we probably have a lot of broods, but I think the brood sizes are going to be down this year just because a lot of those chicks are not going to be able to survive those first 10 to 15 days.
How do you estimate your pheasant populations? I know you do crowing counts, but
Yep.
you also count the broods.
Yep, we have a couple different methods. A crowing count is what we do in the spring in May typically, and that's just indexing the number of roosters that we hear on assigned transects, and these transects we run every year. That gives us an index of that hunting or that spring population. What that really tells us is it's indicative of the previous year's hunting season. So when we have a good hunting season, that following May we have a pretty high crowing count. It doesn't necessarily relate to our future hunting seasons because there are too many variables that play on nest initiation. Habitat is the big key here. I mean, if we don't have habitat, we're not going to have nests. And then if we have bad weather, whether it's cool or wet or really hot and dry, those both impact. So we want a happy medium of wet weather and dry weather.
You mentioned habitat and the loss of habitat, and it seems like where you're finding pheasants, where there is good habitat, you're also finding a lot of pheasant hunters.
Yeah, I think that's one of the challenges we're starting to run into this over the last few years is we've lost CRP. A lot of that CRP has been tied with our plots program. A lot of those plots acres have come out, and so now it's condensing the areas where we have plots associated with that good pheasant CRP habitat, and that is congregating hunters. And so it's not uncommon to go out to some of these plots in the southwest at 6 in the morning before the sun's even up and find 5 or 6 pickups. You know, so there are a lot of places across the state that hold pheasants that hunters can have a really fun hunt, get into birds, and be away from hunters. The Southwest obviously has the most pheasants, and everyone knows that. But we do have pheasants spread across this state, and there are great opportunities in other parts of the state as well.
Bottom line, I guess, for Upland in North Dakota, at least for this year, some good, some not so good.
Yeah, it is a little early to tell. You know, most of our fall predictions are going to come after we start our brood surveys. That's when we really start to understand what our production was for this year. Once we start that, which will begin in the next 2 weeks, we'll be able to be a little bit more strategic in letting sportsmen know where the populations are strong.
We'll sit down a little closer to the opening of grouse seasons and talk further.
Yeah, great.
All right, thanks, Aaron.
Yep.
Here are the scheduled opening dates for upland game in North Dakota. Sharptail, ruffed grouse, and partridge seasons all open on Saturday, September 10th. The daily limit for all 3 species is 3 and the possession limit is 12. Pheasant season is scheduled to open on Saturday, October 8th, and the limits are the same as the grouse species, 3 daily and 12 in possession. As Aaron mentioned, there is no open season on sage grouse again this year. For Aaron Robinson and the rest of the staff here at North Dakota Game and Fish, thanks for joining us for Outdoors Online. We'll see you again next week.